Correct.
So the documents at page 273 and following appear to show that the company Euroblitz and Mr. Vincent Smith are indeed related.
They are related, yes.
Okay. So you say in paragraph 24.10, subsequent to this payment, I became aware of the fact that Vincent Smith had an interest in Euroblitz Pty Limited.
That is correct.
The payment for Vincent Smith's daughter's following year of study was paid to Euroblitz.
That is correct.
All right. It may have been the fault of others apart from yourself, but 24.9 then needs to be corrected. Because the proof of payment is in relation not to page 270, but in relation to a prior payment for fees.
If you read 24.10, it says, subsequent to this payment, I became aware of the fact that Vincent Smith had an interest in Euroblitz. The payment for Vincent Smith's daughter's following year of study was paid to Euroblitz.
Yes, I don't want to get involved in semantics with you, Mr. Agrizzi, but in page 24.9, you say that in relation to Annexure H, a proof of payment, you appear to associate the proof of payment to the evidence on page 270. But let's leave it there for the moment. What has come out of your evidence is reasonably clear. Can we move on?
Yes, we can.
But what may, you may have to consider, and I'm sure the legal team will also consider, is whether paragraph 24.9 accurately reflects what you intended to say, and whether, to the extent that it might not, whether what you have said clarifies it or whether it's necessary to make a correction
Yes, we will,
of some kind.
we will look at that, Chair.
Yeah.
The issue, of course, is that both the email chain relating to 2016 and the proof of payment relating to 2015, the prior payment, are both Annexure H, which is...
Oh, which could have caused
that
confusion.
may have caused the confusion.
Yeah, okay.
But the evidence at least is clear.
I just want to make sure that we don't have a situation where there is some unnecessary issue that arises from this confusion, maybe under cross-examination, if cross-examination is granted, so that there should just be clarity. But as long as you satisfy yourself that one way or another there is clarity whether there is a need for an amendment or supplementary affidavit or there isn't, as long as the situation is clearly clarified.
We will do, Chair. Just rereading 24.9, it may well be necessary. I'm sorry, Chair, it may well be unnecessary to amend it. Given
may well
that
be, yeah.
Annexure H refers to both years of payment.
Yeah, it may be. It may be.
Thank you. If we can get then on to paragraph 24.11, Mr. Agrizzi. You refer there to Mr. Smith and the matters relating to Mr. Smith being raised in Parliament in the context of an alleged loan. Would you tell the Chair, please, about those incidents?
Chair, Mr. Smith made statements and put out a press release that in fact he had a personal loan with myself, which is totally incorrect. There was no such thing. He did approach me for a loan, and what he offered to do was to sell me his shares in a hospital at Waterfall Estate, which I refused. I said that it would, number one, contravene every single BEE rule in the book, and number two, it would be very obvious if it came directly to me. I did not give Mr. Smith any loans. I don't know him. I met him, and it was an association with him that developed over a couple of months, but it was not a personal relationship in any way, and I would never have loaned him money.
Of course, you know him now. You know him. You just said you don't know him.
Yes,
you didn't know him before.
I didn't know him. Why would I give him loans?
Yeah. But was the request for a loan, was it not made after you had got to know him, after that meeting that you told me?
He made a request to a loan when I'd already left Bosasa.
Oh, that's
So what I'm saying is that he made the request for a loan in cash.
Yes.
I didn't know him then anymore. I wasn't interested in him.
Oh, okay.
And he approached me to come to me with the shares that he had in Waterfall. There's a life hospital, I think, there, and he brought me documentation, and I said to him I wasn't interested.
This was when? Was it
So well after I
2017?
left, this was in 2017, 2018.
Okay, all right.
How did the matter arise in Parliament? What was the context of Mr. Smith's claim?
Once more, there was a newspaper report, and he said, and they asked me about it. They sent questions to me. I said, well, this is what happened. You know, asked Bosasa. I definitely don't know anything about Mr. Smith's dealings anymore, and that's how it came up in Parliament. And he then raised it. My understanding is that, you know, he tried to make it out as if I'd loaned him the money, and I didn't. I paid him the money on instruction from Gavin Watson, simple as that.
Can you recall more or less when the matter was raised in Parliament?
It was well after I'd left Bosasa.
Also 2017, 2018?
Yes.
And in relation to the matter being raised in Parliament, when, before or after, did he request a loan from you?
No, it was before that he asked me for a loan.
So he asked you for a loan, you refused. He offered to sell you his shareholding, you refused. After that, the matter was raised in Parliament, and Mr. Smith claimed you had arranged a loan to him.
That's true.
Is that the sequence?
That is the sequence, sir.
Then if we may continue then with paragraph 25, you deal with matters related in this paragraph to the Department of Correctional Services.
That's correct.
When did you meet Mr. Patrick Gillingham for the first time?
Patrick Gillingham was introduced to me at the Lindela repatriation facility, I would say in 2013, mid to late 2013.
The date in paragraph 25.1, is that correct or not?
Sorry, 2003, that's right.
Not 2013.
Oh, sorry, I get confused sometimes.
Sure. No.
2003.
So you met Patrick Gillingham at Lindela in 2003.
That's correct.
Before that, were you aware of any involvement that he had with Bosasa or Gavin Watson?
I did not know Patrick Gillingham from a bar of soap. I didn't know who he was. The only thing I knew was that we were supplying beef forequarters to one of the Department of Correctional facilities. That's all I knew. At the stage, I was running the butcheries for Diambu and Bosasa, and I knew that we had to deliver whenever they phoned. It was rare.
Rare occasion or rare beef?
The beef was C3 grade.
Sorry, unnecessary, Mr. Chair. Did you know what position Mr. Gillingham held at the time?
Chair, could I have clarity? When I met him at Lindela,
Yes.
I've never been in the army or the defence force or the police. I saw a lot of brass and I thought it was extremely important. I didn't know what position he held.
He was wearing uniform, but you don't know what uniform, what department that uniform represented.
No, I knew, sorry, Chair, I knew it was the correctional services, but I didn't know what their rank status was in that. I actually wasn't interested in it at all.
So it's apparent that at the time he was employed at the Department of Correctional Services.
That's right.
Right, and you've already spoken about the arrangement or contract for the supply of beef to, is it correctional services establishments?
That's correct, Chair.
Prisons, in short.
That's correct. I did not even know that that he was involved at that stage with the supply of beef, or that it was his contract or anything like that. I didn't even put two and two together.
Who was handling that contract for Bosasa?
The beef contract?
Yes.
I would merely do the deliveries. Apparently, I found out afterwards that was being handled by Paul Foster.
And has that, or was that contract subsequently taken over by another person?
Well, you're talking about the contract or the liaison with Mr. Gillingham?
Both.
That was taken over later by Danny Mansell because because Paul Foster passed away.
Right. Who introduced you to Mr. Gillingham?
Mr. Gavin Watson introduced me to Mr. Patrick Gillingham.
And at the time of the introduction, did Mr. Watson say anything about his or Bosasa's relationship and further contemplated relationship?
Chair, at the time
with him, Mr. Gillingham?
At the time with Mr. Gillingham, I was told that we would be working very closely with Mr. Gillingham by Mr. Watson. I was busy, at the moment, at that stage, I was busy doing a quality audit at Lindela and in preparation for an ISO accreditation. So I was not too interested in who he was walking with and showing around. But I recall him telling me that we're going to be working very closely with him.
Did Mr. Gavin Watson at that time or shortly thereafter tell you anything about his intentions regarding existing catering contracts at the mines?
At that stage, Mr. Watson wanted to get rid of the existing catering contracts at the mines, and he wanted to venture into new ventures.
And specifically, when you refer to new ventures, what are you referring to?
He wanted to get involved specifically with security contracts, government contracts, and state-owned enterprises.
Right. Only security contracts?
No, catering, facilities management, that as well.
And do you know why Mr. Watson wanted to extract Bosasa from mining contracts?
Well, you recall that the mining industry went through a very rough patch during those years. There was always problems with payments. There were delays in payments, and he simply wanted to get out of that business.
Right. Do you recall the first contract that Bosasa was awarded, or one of the first contracts of which you became aware in 2004? A contract awarded by the Department of Correctional Services. You deal with that in paragraph 25.6.
Yeah. So, Chair, if I may, during course of 2004, Bosasa received a training contract from the Department of Correctional Services. I had nothing to do with that contract. I wasn't even aware of it until such time as Dr. Jürgen Smith actually invited me to a function where they were, it says in my statement, invited me to a function for the awarding of the contract. That is incorrect. I'd like to correct that. It was for the awards evening at the contract. And if I can explain it to you.
I'm sorry, what paragraph are we missing?
If you look at 25.6.
25.6.
It invited me, the fourth line, it says, Dr. Smith invited me to a function for the awarding of the contract. As I said, the statement was rushed. So it's supposed to say,
yeah.
it's supposed to actually read, I've invited me to a function for the awards evening of the contract. Because later on, you'll see, I say that this function appeared to be coordinated by Dr. Jürgen Smith and Mark Tavener. So what had happened, Chair, if I can give it perspective.
Yes.
The function that was held was a function I did not even know that we had been given this contract to train, and it was to train senior officials at the various correctional services units on the implementation of Act 111, which included catering. That's what it means. Does that answer your question?
The reference to 111, I'm not following.
Sorry, it was the training I found out subsequently, because I did not know about this contract, Chair. But the training was a prelude to train up people to comply with the meal intervals of Act 111 of some other act.
The Correctional Services
Correctional
Act.
Services Act, yes.
Okay.
So it was a training program for these officials. I was awarded, I only found out about this contract when they were doing the awards evening for the people that attended. So I attended, and it's the first time I knew about that contract specifically.
So had the training already been done, or was it done the same day?
It was in progress.
It was done on the same day, and the awards were...
I can't remember if it was done on the same day or that, but I just went to the evening.
Awards, yeah.
I went to the evening it was awarded
Yes,
to.
okay.
I don't know how
But
long
the
it
training
was. I had no information on that.
But the training had been done by Bosasa.
Yes, I remember the people getting awards.
Okay.
Okay. This function was coordinated by Dr. Jürgen Smith and Mark Tavener. He was a Bosasa employee. Mark was also the brother-in-law of Gavin Watson. So it was all new to me. They continued with it. I was just invited by Dr. Smith, who I saw as a mentor.
In paragraph 25.7, you refer to the future involvement of Mr. Tavener, of which you, at that stage, had not become aware or were not aware.
That's correct.
Tell the Chair about that, please.
I wasn't aware that Tavener was in any way involved with furnishing of Mti and Gillingham's houses. And perhaps that's why I wasn't told about the very first contract for the training. Was perhaps they didn't want me to know about it. But at the beginning of 2004, I believe that they started with buying furniture, building of the houses and all that type of thing.
We'll come to that detail in due course.
Okay.
In paragraph 25.8, you talk of your second meeting with Mr. Gillingham.
Yes.
Please tell the Chair about that meeting.
At the beginning of 2004, Chair, I met Gillingham for the second time. Gavin Watson informed me that the company, this was just the day before, that the company and some of the other employees of Bosasa operations had to attend a tour of the prisons around the country with Gillingham. And we had to evaluate the catering needs and the concerns of correctional services, and we had to create a blueprint for the catering services. So my understanding at that stage was we're going around, we're going to draw up a blueprint, we're going to identify what the needs are, where the problems are, and establish from their training and that type of thing. That was my understanding. But we were also told not to wear Bosasa uniform. So Bosasa had a very distinct uniform, blue shirts, similar to what I'm wearing today, blue ties, and we were not to wear uniforms. We had to be in plain clothes, and we were not to be identified as Bosasa, and the tour would be coordinated by Danny Mansell and Patrick Gillingham, who seemed to have had a good relationship at the time.
Right. It may be preempting the evidence to follow, but during the course of that visit, which you relate later, in your statement, did you gain knowledge of the catering needs and concerns of the Department of Correctional Services? In short, did you gain knowledge of the business of catering at the Correctional Services institutions?
Most definitely.
Who went on this tour?
Myself, Franz Foster, there was a gentleman by the name of Henny Viljoen, Danny Mansell, there was Patrick Gillingham as well.
Before you go on, Franz Forster's experience and skills?
He's skilled in logistics, transportation, purchasing.
That would be the logistics of catering, food and the like.
And vehicles and delivery of cement and all that type of thing.
And Mr. Viljoen?
He's more on the maintenance and the technical side, and that's to do specifically with facilities management and catering services.
Mr. Mansell?
Mr. Mansell was a business consultant, and I remember he was previously the owner, or 50% owner, of Diambo.
Right. Which had been involved in catering.
That's correct.
You visited what establishments?
Well, we started off at Johannesburg establishment. The reason I remember Johannesburg was because of Hento Davids, who was very helped us a lot. Then we went to Port Elizabeth, we went to Durban, Cape Town, Pretoria, and Modderby.
And approximately how many prisons did you visit?
Well, those are the management area. If I remember correctly, it's probably about 26 of the facilities, but once you've seen one, you've seen them all really. So I can't recall the exact number.
And on these tours, did you communicate with others within the establishments?
So in order to do a proper comprehensive report, Chair, to be able to understand what is happening there, we'd spend a lot of time in the facilities, talk to the offenders, talk to the officials that were running it, and then also talk to the staff, in the facility itself, so that we could gain as much information as possible.
The purpose of the tour was to compile or to produce a report, you say?
Yes, the idea behind the whole operation was to be able to produce a blueprint and to say, these are the issues, these are the current costs, which we'll be able to ascertain, these are where the faults are, this is what needs to be done, this is the type of equipment you would require to improve the services and make it more economically viable, yes.
So you also dealt with costings?
Yes.
A general question, it'll become more clear later, but would this information be useful to anyone wishing to tender for any resultant bid?
Well, it will most definitely give you the edge because you'd know exactly what to do.
Who paid for the expenses relating to this tour?
As far as I know, Bosasa paid for the hotels and the flights that was pre-booked by Bosasa, probably by Blake's Travel, but I don't have first-hand knowledge on the bookings or the payment of the invoices.
And extra hotel expenses for Bosasa employees?
Well, I paid for the Bosasa employees and I did not pay for Gillingham at all.
Right. You then would have concluded the tour. What happened then in relation to this report?
Well, the report I would have submitted to Gavin Watson and Danny Mansell. I had to file it. I had to do a whole lot of additional work. I wanted to add to it. I wanted a professional report to come out of it.
And having been on this tour, did you develop an idea for further possible involvement at the Department of Correctional Services of commercial value to Bosasa?
Well, Chair, catering is catering, really, if I can explain it, because I don't want to be found short not explaining it. Catering is catering. Whether you're catering in a hospital or you're catering in a detention facility, it's exactly the same. The mechanisms used are the same. The processes used are the same. The only difference is you have higher security or not. So what I wanted to do was enhance it by bringing in catering security systems. So things like scanning bags of millimil before they went to the stores, things like that, to prevent smuggling and that. So I gave a task to one of the people that worked for me, a guy by the name of Johan Helmut, asked him to continue and design me a solution that we could implement or show the department.
So what did you do in that regard?
Well, he designed me that, and I incorporated into my final report and specification layout.
Was the report then submitted, as you say, to Gavin Watson and then returned to you?
The report was finalized, and after all the comments and final approval was given by Gavin, he then gave me 2 email addresses. I recall it vividly. He wrote it down on it was written on a piece of paper, and it wasn't his handwriting. It looked more like Danny Mansell's handwriting, and I was given 2 email addresses and told that's where you email it to, and the one was cobus@bfn.co.za, stockies@bfn.co.za.
Was the other one?
Yes.
Yes, and tell the Chair, please, did you learn the final destination of what was sent to these email addresses? In other words, who owned well, perhaps not who owned, but who the addressee was in person?
I cannot recall exactly which one right now. It's in my statement, but I can't which is which, but it was Mansell and Gillingham. So it was at bloemfontein.co.za and bloemfontein.co.za. So it was for Mansell and Gillingham.
So you were then instructed by Mr. Gavin Watson to send the finalized report to Mansell and to Gillingham.
That's correct.
At the time, what did you believe the role of Bosasa was in relation to what you've just told the Chair?
At first, I believed that Bosasa was acting as a consultant for the Department of Correctional Services. I thought it was to assist them in determining exactly what was necessary in their facilities. At that stage, I didn't actually know that this document would become a specifications document that would be used as an invitation to bid for a tender document.
Right. You weren't told this at any stage?
Never.
Not even when you were preparing the report?
No, I was told that it's a blueprint that they're looking at.
I interrupted you. Would you want to complete?
No, and bearing in mind that we were doing the youth centers in the Lindela repatriation facility, we had that knowledge. So to me, it was plausible that we are being asked to draw up a blueprint for them. There are many times that we were asked to draw up blueprints for child justice and things like that, which we did. So I thought this was one of those things.
But as I understand your evidence in paragraph 25.17, and you have just told the Chair this, the information in that report prepared by you became or was transferred into the specification documents used as part of the invitation to bid for the Correctional Services catering tender.
That is correct.
When did you learn of that fact?
When the bid came out, I was told that, we have to tender for it.
So you prepared the report. You were taken on a tour of correctional services.
Yes.
Managed by a correctional services official,
Correct.
Mr. Gillingham. You received information both in relation to the physical facilities and costings as well as other logistical information.
That is correct, Chair.
You compiled a report.
That is correct, Chair.
That report found its way into the tender documents and in particular into the specifications in those documents.
That is correct.
And then you were instructed to respond to the invitation to tender.
That is correct,
invitation
Chair.
to bid, rather.
That is correct, Chair.
And I presume you're aware that that's quite improper.
I'm well aware of that, Chair.
When was the bid advertised?
The bid was advertised on the 21st of May 2004.
Right. Did you make any comment in regard to what you've just told the Chair to Mr. Watson?
Chair, I mentioned it to Mr. Gavin Watson. I said to him that there's large portions, not everything, but there were large portions that were identical to the specification that I had submitted and the analysis report that I had submitted to Mr. Mansell. Even at one stage, the conclusion appeared to have been used in the specifications document, which formed part of the invitation to bid on the catering tender.
And what was Mr. Watson's response to what you told him?
As always, Mr. Watson had it all under control.
Is that what he told you?
That's exactly what he told me. He told me just to do it. He's going to be awarded the contract. I must just do the paperwork.
Just be a bit clearer, please. What did he tell you about the award of the contract?
He told me that it would be awarded to Bosasa. I must just keep quiet, keep my head down, and just do the paperwork and fill in the tender. That's what he meant.
Okay. Who compiled the response to the invitation to bid?
I had a team that compiled the response to the invitation to bid.
And they did that under your supervision?
That's right. All bids fell under my supervision.
And was the contract ultimately awarded to Bosasa?
It was, Chair, on the 20th of July, 2014.
Is this the same contract that was later investigated and detailed by the SIU?
That is correct, Chair.
Right. We'll come back there when we deal with that report. And for what period of time was the contract awarded?
Initial contract was a 3-year contract.
Right. And do you know what the annual value of the contract was?
Well, the annual value reflected was 239,427,694 rands per annum.
Right. The date in paragraph 25.21 in the second line reads 20 July 2014. That's obviously not correct. What is the correct date?
It seems to be the 27th of July, 2004. I think once more, Chair, because we had limited time, and this was a condense. This was actually condensing the original statement from about 240 pages to try and get it into about 90.
Okay, no, that's fine. And when you pick up errors, you must just make sure corrections can be made.
Will do, Chair.
Do you have any comment to make about the costings in the bid documents prepared under your supervision?
Chair, the costings were manipulated, if I may add that. So we were told to cost on special meals and normal meals. Special meals are high-protein diets, diabetic diets, various diets that are required. We were told that that constitutes 10% of the 100% of the meals charged. Now, if I can put that into perspective for you, 90% of the meals would be normal meals. Normal meals would be charged at, say, 10 rand a meal per person per day. Special meals are exactly the same type of meal, just prepared slightly differently. There's no addition to it. They might very well be cheaper than a normal meal, a special meal. We would charge 20 rand per meal, double the price. Well, that was exactly the same product. But the interesting thing is, when you did your cross calculations and you worked on the 90-10 principle, you'd come in with a total figure of, say, 239,427,000 rand. However, truth be told, the special meals were considerably higher. They were running at about 30%, and normal meals were running at 70%. So in actual fact, the 239 million that is reflected there was actually understated. And that once you had finished the month and costed out everything, you would be on average 35% higher. So, although the bid was submitted for 239,427,000 rand, if they do their analysis, they'll note that in actual fact they probably would have paid closer to the 310 million rand versus the 239 million rand for the first year. That's how it was manipulated.
So in short, Mr. Agrizzi, you told the department in your bid that the services would cost 239 odd million per annum.
Correct. So it would be geared at that price.
But in fact, you knew that you would, in reality, charge them much more when the contract was executed.
Because you would be charging them on actual meals served, and therefore your price would come out at much higher.
And then what happened on 29 September 2004?
On instruction from Gavin Watson, I was told to make a proposal to Gillingham that there were 7 satellite correctional centres that we should have included in the catering tender itself. I know that at the time that this had been negotiated and discussed with Danny Mansell and with Gillingham Chair. And I also know that when the instruction was given to me, there was a specific reason for it. MT had also approved this. The expansion of that contract was fully approved, and all I needed to do was provide a price for it.
All right. Who, just give his full names, please, MT's full names.
It's Richmond Linda MT.
What position did he occupy at the time?
He was the National Commissioner of Correctional Services at the time.
What was the value of this expansion?
That expansion was 14 million rand extra per month.
Was that expansion authorized by the original tender documents? And in other words, could the expansion properly be awarded in terms of a contract without going through a new tender process?
No, this would have had to go through a new tender process, and everybody was aware of that. Everybody was just too scared to make that comment, to make that suggestion that it should be fixed up.
And did it in fact go out to tender?
Never.
So without authorization in terms of the original tender and without authorization in terms of a new tender, an extension was granted to extend the catering contract to other correctional centres, and the value of that to Bosasa was 14 million rand per month.
Correct.
And were you rewarded for all the work that you had done here?
Every single staff member in the company got increases that year.
Other than normal annual increases?
There were substantial increases.
Okay.
Can you say whether your increase was a reward for the work you had done in relation to the correctional services contract?
Chair, I would have to flip back to that specific date. As I said earlier, my wife unfortunately takes all my money, so I wouldn't know. I'd need to have a look.
In any event, in the...
Correction, sorry, Chair, there was a substantial increase.
Yes.
And I also had, they painted out my house for me.
Yes. And are you able to say how much the increase was in terms of percentage?
I can, most definitely, Chair. Chair, it went up from 234,000 Rand to 406,000 Rand.
Oh, it was doubled, more than doubled.
You're right.
About doubled.
She probably took 90% of that anyway.
Okay, thank you.
So in summary, Mr. Agrizzi, in relation to the catering services contract awarded to Bosasa by the Department of Correctional Service, in or around 2004, you were personally involved in the events preceding the issue of the tender documents.
Yes.
You compiled the tender documents with the response to the bid for tender, more
The
particularly.
specifications. The specifications.
Yes, Chair.
You compiled the specifications.
Yes, Chair.
Yeah.
Well, you compiled the report, which became specifications.
Correct. That is correct.
Oh, okay.
Right. You also were instrumental in the sense that you led the team that compiled the response to the invitation to bid.
That is correct, Chair.
And you were there also aware of and involved in the undercosting, which resulted later in a higher payment to Bosasa.
I was aware of the undercosting, but the costings were actually completed and finalized by Mr. Mansell.
Yes. But this was all done under your supervision.
That is correct.
And then you knew of the improper or even unlawful extension to the further 7 satellite correctional centres.
That is correct, Chair.
You told us what the increase was that you were given after you had made the contribution that you made to ensure Bosasa got that contract. And you said that they painted your house as well, is that right?
That's correct, Chair.
What is the monetary value that you could put on the paint on them painting your house?
It was about 30,000 rand.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Is that the same painting of the house referred to in the schedule at the beginning of your statement?
That is correct.
And if the amount is there, is it? Well, you needn't go there. It is there. It's not going to change.
Okay, no, it's the same.
Was there a meeting held at Supersport Park after the catering tender had been awarded to Bosasa?
That's correct.
More or less, when was that meeting held?
If I remember correctly, it was in November 2004.
And what was the purpose of the meeting, or what happened at the meeting?
The meeting was their monthly meeting, and we were asked to do a presentation on the progress of the implementation of the catering tender, and also to showcase some of the other services that we could provide. So that was the first time I really met Richmond Linda MT, and the third time I'd encountered Gillingham. Although I didn't interact with Gillingham or MT because they were in a formal environment, and we were very reserved in how we reacted or how we spoke to them.
Right. You obviously attended the meeting. Did anyone else from Bosasa attend the meeting?
A number of directors, Chair, attended the meeting with me. Mansell and Watson, however, did not.
Approximately how many people in total attended the meeting?
In total, from corrections side and from Bosasa side, there were a total of about 40 people that attended.
Right. And did Mr. MT, Commissioner MT at the time, participate in the proceedings?
No, he did most definitely, but he didn't really interact with us. He was interacting with these people.
Right. Did you receive any feedback the following day in relation to the meeting from Gavin Watson?
Gavin Watson said that he had received very good big feedback from Mr. MT, and it was very positive. I was then also told that there was something else in the pipeline, namely an access control contract.
Right. In the pipeline for
Correct.
Bosasa, I presume.
Correct.
And in relation to that, did you receive an instruction?
I was given an instruction by Watson and Mansell to once more draft the specification document for an access control system that would be advertised.
So once again, you learn of a contract that is to be awarded in the future.
Correct.
By the Department of Correctional Services.
That is correct.
This is shortly after the presentation meeting that you've referred to.
Correct.
Before, I presume, any tender documents are issued or any publication of the intention to issue a tender is advertised, you are instructed to draft a specification document.
That is correct.
So am I correct? Perhaps I've been leading a little excessively. It's late in the day, my apologies, Chair, but is it correct that when you were instructed to draft the specification document, there had been no public announcement of the intention to award a tender for access control at correctional services institutions?
Chair, that is correct.
Were you given any further instruction in relation to the manner in which you should produce this draft, or what the draft specifications document should include?
Chair, I was told that I needed to draft it in such a manner that it was a foregone conclusion that Bosasa would, or that time it was Zondo, but would be awarded the contract. I was told to make sure that you put in restrictive clauses. One of them was ISO standards, things like that.
You referred to ISO standards. We don't necessarily know about those things. Just explain, perhaps.
Before you proceed, Mr. Pretorius, now drafting it in such a way that the award of the tender or contract to Bosasa would be guaranteed. How would this be achieved in terms of drafting? Would it be that you would put in features that only Bosasa is likely to have in terms of what it can do with the tender?
That is correct, Chair.
That it's unlikely that other companies would have.
That is correct. Would you like me to give you examples?
Yeah, give examples, one or two.
So, one of them would be that they had to have worked in a secure care environment.
They had to have what?
The applicant would have to have worked in a secure care environment. In other words, a prison.
Yeah. In
or
other
a
words,
detention facility.
Oh.
So that you had the skill and training to work with offenders or amongst offenders.
Oh.
Another point would have been national key points, that you must be a national key points accredited service provider. There's not many people that have that. So those are the restrictive clauses that were put in.
At whose instance?
At the instance of Mr. Watson and Mr. Mansell.
And of course, you've already told the Chair that Bosasa had, through one of its companies, involvement in the Lindela Repatriation Centre, which was a care environment.
Correct, Chair.
Did you receive any further information from the Department of Correctional Services in the process of drafting the specifications?
Well, the Department of Correction supplied Mansell with an overview of their needs and more or less what they needed to be achieved. And I then used Johannesburg Correctional Facility to model it and to provide the blueprint around it.
Right. Did you do as you were told?
Always.
Did you produce the specifications document?
Yes, I did.
And to whom did you give it?
It was mailed.
Now, before it was mailed.
I gave it to Gary Watson, who would have a look at it.
And did he approve it?
He wasn't very interested, but he said it was fine. I must just send it to Danny and to Patrick.
Right, so this document was sent to the same two email addresses as you referred to in paragraph 25.16.
That is correct.
And you told the Chair that these were the email addresses of Gillingham and Mansell respectively, although you couldn't remember which was which.
I cannot.
Please remind me, maybe I've forgotten now, who was Denny? You said he asked you to send to Denny and to Mr. Gillingham.
I don't know which one was Stockies and which one was Cobus. So it was Danny Mansell and Patrick Gillingham.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
We will find that out later in the evidence.
Thank you.
After,
No, I think what created the problem for me is that all along in respect of Mr. Mansell, you said you used the surname. But
Yes.
then now you said Danny and I didn't know who's Danny.
Sorry, Chair.
Yeah.
I'm not used to these cross-questionings.
Yeah, okay, all right. Well, we have 5 minutes to go and then
No problem.
It will be fine for the day. Thank you.
subsequent to your preparation of the specifications document was an invitation to bid advertised by the Department of Correctional Services.
Could you repeat that question? Subsequent?
You prepare the specifications
Yes.
document.
Yes,
You send it to Mr. Mansell and Mr. Patrick Gillingham.
correct.
Mr. Gillingham is employed at that stage by the Department of Correctional Services.
Correct.
Then, as I understand your evidence, the Department of Correctional Services actually issue an invitation to bid in relation to those very specifications which you've drafted.
That is correct.
Do you recall when the invitation to bid was advertised?
If I remember correctly, I think it was the 4th of February, 2005.
Right. Did you then receive an instruction from Gavin Watson in relation to that invitation to bid?
But I was asked to bid under Bosasa Security, PDY Limited.
Did you carry out that instruction?
I started to prepare for it, yes.
And before the document was submitted,
No, sorry, Chair, before the document was submitted, and that's maybe why sometimes it gets confusing. Before the document was submitted, the actual bid document, the last minute, Gavin Watson said, change it to a new company called Zondo IT.
all right, so the initial instruction was to respond to the invitation to bid under the name of Bosasa Security Pty Limited.
Correct.
Gavin Watson then intervened before the tender documents were submitted and said we must establish a new company.
Correct.
And the new company established at that stage was Sondola IT Pty Limited.
That is correct.
This required amendments, presumably, to the bid documents, correct?
That's correct.
And were these effected? It should read effected with an E, not an A. But they were effected and the application was submitted.
That's correct.
Right. What happened in regard to the award of the contract?
It was about the April 2005 we were actually awarded that contract.
Sondola IT
That's
Pty
correct.
Limited.
That's correct.
And for what period was the contract awarded?
The contract's initial period was a 2-year contract and was then later expanded.
In what respect was it expanded?
Well, it was all well and fine that they had this beautiful system, but they didn't have anybody to manage it. So that it was extended in terms of a control room contract. And we basically were paid to manage control rooms for the department.
At how many sites?
At, if I recall correctly, 66 sites.
Right. And what was the value of that expansion?
Just that value was about 240 million, around there.
Right. Is that the figure referred to in paragraph 26.9?
Okay, my correction, 236 million, 997 rand, 997,385.31 cents.
Right.
This amount is quite a big amount, but maybe not by Bosasa standards. Was it, as far as you are concerned, the true value of the contract, or was there any act of inflation? Now I'm talking about this one, but maybe you can enlighten me on others as well, because some of these contracts that Bosasa seems to have been awarded at correctional services and the one in the Department of Justice in 2013, the amounts seemed quite large. but it may be that they reflected the true value. But I just want to find out from you.
Chair, they had captured the department. So it was inevitable that the 236 million rand, which was budgeted, was going to be exceeded. Who was going to, you see, Chair, if I may explain, you had this beautiful system, state of the art, but who was actually going to run it? We knew at that stage that unless they took the proper measures and employed the right staff, that the system would fall flat. So you had them in your clutches, because now you would have to employ people and train them up to actually run the system and keep them there for the rest of time.
But does that talk to the question of whether there was inflation at the beginning?
Yes.
Okay.
Because you now had to pay, and I think the amount that they paid every month was an additional 7.8 million rand per month, because now you had to staff it. So it was never budgeted for.
That's in regard to this one. Now, in regard to the others that were other contracts that were awarded to Bosasa by Correctional Services and the one by the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development in 2013, are you able to say that in regard to those two there was inflation of prices or not really?
There was, most definitely.
There was?
Correct.
Thank you.
In relation to the expansion to include the staffing of the control rooms at 66 sites, you will recall right in the beginning of your evidence, we told the Chair that there were some expansions that were authorized by the original tender documents and some weren't, and therefore would have to go out to new tender.
Correct.
What was the case here? Was this expansion authorized?
It was emergency, so it would have been authorized automatically. So it was an emergency because they needed to run the control rooms. So it was authorized in terms of the department's processes, but it never went out in tender for the staffing.
So you would have responded to an invitation to bid at a certain price, which was apparently budgeted for.
Correct.
By the Department of Correctional Services.
Correct.
But then later, as you knew would happen, the requirement for further expenditure on the part of the department entered the scene, and you benefited then from the extension of the staffing, or the extension of the contract in relation to staffing.
That is correct.
Right, and the value of that was over 236 million rand per annum?
Potentially, yeah.
Or overall for the 2 years?
No, that's over 2 years.
Right. After the award of that contract, were you called into a meeting?
Yes, I was.
What happened at that meeting?
At the meeting, I was told by Ishmael Tikane, who was at that stage Ngwaba, Gumedi and Leshabane, that I was doing a phenomenal job, and I was told to trade in my old Audi A6 for a new Audi A6, and the company would basically cover the shortfall, which they did with everybody, but the specific year it was mine. They would cover the shortfall. It was about 174,000 rand, and Dr. Smith handled the whole transaction.
You mentioned the name Ishmael Dikani and the name Ngwaba. The latter name, was that his name at the time? Surname at the time?
That is correct.
That's MNCWABA. Is that correct?
That's correct.
In short, are you telling the Chair that you were rewarded for all the good work you'd done for Bosasa in relation to the evidence you've just given?
Most definitely.
This might not... Oh, let me ask. Are you sure that with regard to Mwaba, the last letter is A and not E?
Chair, I'd have to check out.
You would have to check, okay.
Sorry.
Okay.
We had a debate
it might
about
be A, but I know Mwabe with an E, so...
I'm not too sure.
Okay, no, that's fine. I just wanted to make sure that we get that right if it is E.
Thank you.
Is that a convenient time, Chair?
Yes. We will we'll adjourn for today. Mr. Pretorius and Mr. Agrizzi.
We have an hour to make up.
Yeah, we have an hour to make up, but I think I had indicated that we would start earlier than normal tomorrow, maybe at 9 in order to do that. But I would like to change that and this suggests that we add the hour from 4 to 5, if possible, tomorrow. Would that be okay with you, Mr. Agrizzi?
As it pleases the Chair.
You. And Mr. Pretorius?
Yes, that's absolutely
Would that be all right?
fine.
Okay. So tomorrow morning we start at 10. I just need to attend to something relating to the commission. So if we start at 9, I won't have that time.
Yes, and you had a statement that you were going to make tomorrow.
Yeah, but I've got something else also that will need my attention. Okay, thank you. We adjourn now and we'll resume tomorrow at 10 o'clock.